I'm Orkan Amashov, you're watching Caucasus Now. In peace, there's nothing so becomes a linchpin of stability and prosperity as enhanced connectivity and economic interdependence. A positive peace, amongst other things, means better communication and mutually beneficial trade exchanges. Quite a considerable part of the wider Azerbaijan-Armenian peace agenda is actually about the unblocking of economic and transport links. But the provisions related to this subject are not part of the text of a draft peace agreement recently finalized between the sides. Baku and Yerevan remain at loggerheads in connection with the connectivity subject. What are the key stumbling blocks and sticking points? Let's try to understand.
Connectivity, if not defined with precision, could indeed be an empty piece of terminology. However, the politics of connectivity, understood in light of a certain context, is always specific. The geopolitics of the South Caucasus, to be more precise, its intra-regional dynamics, have perceptibly changed as of November 2020, when Azerbaijan emerged victorious from its war with Armenia. The kaleidoscope of regional connectivity was also shaken, with some pieces of potential future transportation linkages currently remaining in flux. They will be settled at some point. Both Azerbaijan and Armenia have been supporting the wider connectivity agenda revolving around the unblocking of economic and transport links and the construction of new ones as part of the normalization efforts between the countries. Armenia's Crossroads of Peace initiative, which came into being only in late 2023, and Azerbaijan's connectivity agenda, incorporating the Zangezur corridor, a proposed unimpeded overland passage connecting mainland Azerbaijan with its Nakhchivan exclave, which has been in the official discourse since November 2020, are viewed as being at loggerheads. But are they actually mutually exclusive? Well, what is true is that the negotiations on this subject proved so intractable and complicated that the whole section of the draft peace agreement related to the communication lines and the principles governing them were removed from the text in August 2024 in order to be settled at a later stage. Baku and Yerevan disagree on a number of aspects as to how this passage should function, with two issues, namely the extent of unimpededness and the control over the route remaining a source of contention. Additionally, Armenia's Crossroads of Peace initiative does not prioritize the Zangezur route, downgrading it at the pecking order of priorities. Azerbaijan and Armenia could still sign a deal, and the subject of connectivity is not viewed as an obstacle towards the signing of the treaty. Yet a proper resilient peace requires that this subject is addressed too. How will the compromise be structured? What will be its main components? We are yet to see.
Well, joining me now to discuss this fascinating and somewhat stimulating subject, Arek Kochinyan, President of the Research Center on Security Policy, Yerevan, Armenia, and Vasif Husseinov, Head of the Department at the Center for Analysis of International Relations, Baku, Azerbaijan. Welcome to both of you.
Greetings.
Thank you.
Okay. Arek, my first question is going to be addressed to you. What are the latest Armenian proposals on the unblocking of roads and railways? I believe that Armenian Prime Minister mentioned about those proposals in early March. What do they say in general, and what do they say specifically about Azerbaijan's overland passage demand related to southern Armenia?
It's not aware of the current diplomatic process as long as it is secret. And the announcements that were made about the Armenian suggestions, they were more of a general nature. They didn't show or represent the nature of the suggestions. But I'm aware that the suggestion was sent in the November together with the suggestions on the peace treaty. And as of now, if on the peace treaty Armenian side received the answer of the Azerbaijani side, and then the famous developments happened when the text of the peace agreement was agreed. The same, unfortunately, did not happen with the communication. And it's not even about agreeing, it's about answering the suggestions. And there is a very important political aspect here. If previously the negotiations on the communication were the only ones left that were on the trilateral agenda, meaning Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia, unlike the delimitation demarcation process and unlike the peace treaty itself, the negotiations on the peace treaty itself. I think that with the suggestion with the suggestions sent by the Armenian side on the communication, a political momentum is created when it's possible to move the conversation and the negotiations on the communication issue from the trilateral agenda to the bilateral agenda, which would be a very important development in my opinion, because I honestly think that the success Armenia and Azerbaijan had on the delimitation demarcation agenda and the success Armenia and Azerbaijan had so far on the peace treaty agenda, to an extent, were connected with the nature of the negotiations, with the fact that they were held on the bilateral format. And there are some proofs to this. I mean, the negotiations on the communications happened with the presence of Russia, with the attendance of Russia. For something like 2 years, the deputy prime ministers were meeting with this format for a pretty long period of time. And there was no success. I mean, there were some technical agreements, there were some steps forward, but my understanding is every since and Azerbaijanis were coming to some level of understanding of the future of the nature in this format, the Russian side would come along and say, and what is our role in this? What should we get from this negotiation? So as long as the negotiations are with the participation of Russians, my foreseeing is that there will be no success. Right now, I don't think it's even about this is the last part. I don't think that the most important part is the nature of the suggestions of the suggestions from the Armenian side, but the fact that if Azerbaijan answers to them, we will have quite a different process rather than what we had previously.
It looks like the Azerbaijani side was not particularly impressed by those proposals. I remember the statement made by Ayhan Hajizadeh, spokesperson of the Foreign Ministry, describing those proposals being very entailing elements which are difficult to execute and also providing routes which are going to be very lengthy. But Vasif, what is your take on the subject? The wider connectivity agenda between Azerbaijan and Armenia is not just about the Zangezur corridor. It does entail some other elements. But this overland passage is key to Baku's vision of connectivity. And what do you make of what you have heard about those latest Armenian proposals?
Orhan, according to the trilateral statement which was signed on 10th of November in 2020, all the regional connection and transportation routes were supposed to open. Trilateral statement was not about just the Zangezur corridor. But unfortunately, Zangezur corridor has become the major source of contention between the sides. While for Azerbaijan, in the context of the reopening of transportation routes, the main target is having unimpeded passage between mainland Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan exclave. For Armenia, it is broader. They want to have stable access, transportation access, not only just between Iran and Armenia through the Nakhchivan exclave, but also via the territories of Azerbaijan, mainland Azerbaijan to Armenia, to Russia, and also between Armenia and Turkey. So for Armenia, the target is broader because after the occupation of Azerbaijani territories in early 1990s, Armenia found itself in a self-imposed blockade. I would call it self-imposed because it was the choice of Armenia to be in that situation. Now they are understanding that this blockade, self-imposed blockade, is creating huge economic burdens for Armenia, and for the development of Armenia, its economy, as well as its geopolitical standing, it is extremely important to have stable access to all the neighboring countries, as well as through the neighboring countries beyond the region. In this context, while Armenia is trying to accelerate the process, but at the same time, Armenia is trying to avoid its major commitment enshrined in the trilateral statement, which was about giving unimpeded passage between mainland Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan. In this context, Azerbaijan's position is very clear and very determined. Azerbaijan is not going to make any compromises in this context because Nakhchivan and having stable access to Nakhchivan through the territories of Armenia is extremely important for Azerbaijan. And Armenia has taken this obligation to open its territory for the passage, unimpeded passage between Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan. Uh, I have to make it clear that our TV program today is taking place at an interesting time. A couple of hours ago, I watched President Ursula von der Leyen in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, in the EU Central Asia Leaders Summit. She was talking about the opening of Armenia and Azerbaijan borders, as well as Armenia-Turkish borders for the regional connectivity, its importance for the regional connectivity. It is an important fact that she started her speech by talking about the importance of middle corridor and transportation routes, and she highlighted that the opening of Armenia-Azerbaijan borders is going to make extremely important contribution for overall regional connectivity. In this context, it is an issue of broader importance, not only for the interest of Azerbaijan and Armenia, but also for the interest of Central Asian countries as well as the European Union and also even China. So it shows that we have to make further efforts to reach agreement on Zengezur corridor, but at this moment, unfortunately, it looks very difficult because Armenian side is trying to avoid its commitment to provide an impeded passage, and we have not seen any signs of potential compromise from the Armenian government in this context.
Vasif, before turning to Arik, I would like to reflect on one point, and Arik mentioned that. He said that Azerbaijani-Armenian peace process is currently bilateral. Peace treaty negotiations are bilateral. Negotiations revolving around surrounding demarcation, delimitation are also bilateral. And he effectively said that this transport communications negotiations should also be bilateral, and therefore the Russian element should be excluded. Do you think Azerbaijan could achieve that unimpeded passage objective without involving Russia? I think that's what Arik mentioned about, the bilateral nature of the negotiations.
I understand Arik's points. Especially, we have to consider the fact that last year in August, Armenia and Azerbaijan, for the first time, bilaterally succeeded to sign an agreement on border delimitation. It was later approved by the leaders of both sides, and it shows that we have the potential to reach some agreements on critical issues in bilateral track without the mediation of third parties. But the issue of transportation corridors is a bit more complicated because we have a document signed by the leaders of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia, according to which Russia is by default part of this process. The opening of Zengezur corridor, the passage between Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan, according to the trilateral statement, is going to be supervised, controlled by the Russian side. So by default, we have Russia in this process. For Armenia, it would be great to exclude Russia from these negotiations. Armenian side has officially expressed its intention and highlighted that the trilateral statement is no longer valid. Many points of trilateral statement, according to the Armenian side, were not were not implemented. So it shows that the last article, which is about transportation routes, cannot be also skipped. But from the position of the Azerbaijani side, it is a bit more complicated because President Aliyev last year at least twice mentioned that there is an obligation on the trilateral statement that the passage Zangezur corridor is going to be controlled by border guards of Russia, and he highlighted that it is an obligation that should be fulfilled, respected by all sides, including Armenia. So in this context, I don't see any signs of intention from the Azerbaijani government to exclude Russia from the talks on transportation routes. But of course, from the Armenian side, it would be a desirable outcome.
Arik, what do you think about what Vasif said? Azerbaijan evidently maintains the view that Armenia has a written and signed obligation regarding the opening of communications connecting Azerbaijan's western regions with their Nakhchivan exclave, and it has yet to fulfill that particular obligation. How does this demand of Azerbaijan square with Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's Crossroads of Peace initiative, which was declared in late 2023 after Azerbaijan resumed full de facto control over Karabakh, and after Azerbaijan said, if you remember back in September 2023, said that if Armenia was unwilling to provide an overland passage on Azerbaijani terms, it would resort to the Iranian route. We remember that particular statement made by Azerbaijani officials. Floor is yours, Arik.
Thank you. So first of all, one small comment about your previous statement that there was a reaction from MFA about the Armenian suggestions on the communication. I believe we're speaking about two different issues. There were some official suggestions on the Armenian side that were published, and then there was the Azerbaijani MFA reactions on those. But on the suggestions that I was talking about that were sent by Armenia together with the peace treaty suggestions on November, there still was no reaction from the Azerbaijani side on any official level, and they have nothing to do with any other roads, let's say, to which you were referring to on the MFA reaction in Azerbaijan. Now, going back to the communication issues, for several times it was referred to the November 9th statement, and in those references here, it was used the term Zangezur corridor. I would like to remind everyone that in the November 9th statement, there is no such term as Zangezur corridor. It doesn't exist there. A different term exists there. It was called Lachin corridor. And the Lachin corridor existed according to the November 9th statement. In that historical momentum, I believe the general understanding based on the nature of the statement was that two specific roads will exist. Lachin corridor, and a road on the south of Armenia that would connect Azerbaijan with Nakhchivan, and the Lachin corridor that would connect Armenia to Nagorno-Karabakh. Both of them would be under the Russian control, more or less, and the Russians will provide the connectivity for Azerbaijanis to connect with the Nakhchivan and for Armenians to connect with the Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, after that, quite different situation exists now. First of all, there is no Lachin corridor, and more than that, there is no Nagorno-Karabakh, and there is no Armenian population in Nagorno-Karabakh. So now, Azerbaijan basically wants two things at the same time. Not the unexistence, let's say, of Nagorno-Karabakh together with the Lachin corridor, and also existence of the road and further establishment of the so-called, in the scope, Zangezur corridor to connect itself with Nakhchivan. So it's, first of all, it uses the term that did not exist in the November 9 statement, and more than that, it wants not to provide what was obliged to the Azerbaijani side, but it wants to get what was not even obliged by the Armenian side. And to the term of unimpeded connection. I think this is one of the general disagreements between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And the wording here is very important. Unfortunately, for the word unimpeded, there is no universal reading. What do we mean when we say unimpeded passage? For example, and this was an example brought by the Prime Minister of Armenia. When you leave your house and go to your job place, you have an unimpeded sort of a road to your job place or to your workplace, because nobody stops you, nobody gives you unlawful or unjust demands, etc. Same when Iranian trucks are traveling through Armenia from south to north. Is it an unimpeded? Because they passed through the Armenian legislature, through the Armenian control, and no obstacle is created on their road. We do understand that there is a unique situation, let's say, to some extent, that Azerbaijan wants to connect with its enclave. But there are a couple of questions here. How do we know that this connection is not overused, let's say, to also connect with Turkey? Because Nakhichevan has also a border with Turkey, and theoretically, any cargo or any service or anything that passes through Armenia to get theoretically to Nakhichevan can also be used to communicate with Turkey, or vice versa, from Turkey to get through Nakhichevan through the Armenian road to Azerbaijan. Furthermore, if Azerbaijan is saying that it might use the road, no problem for Armenia there. I mean, if you think that it is economically more interesting for you to travel through the Iranian side, I don't think that it's a problem for the Armenian side. But at the same time, Armenian side announced that it is ready to give legally the same procedures that Iran is doing, and I'm also sure that Armenia is ready to do it cheaper than Iran is doing. So it's all about the principle, whether Azerbaijani side recognizes the sovereignty and the jurisdiction of the Armenian side on the road. If it does, there is no problem to discuss. We can negotiate the best conditions for the control and the easiest conditions for the control over the border passage and the security for the cargo. So as I said, it's an issue of a principle. If the day Azerbaijan announces that it recognizes that the road is under the sovereignty and the jurisdiction of the Armenian side, can be the day when we start a more technical sort of negotiations about the nature of how this road will be used. Last moment about the Russian presence on the road. As I said, the agreement was of a different nature and of a different time when the Russian presence existed on the Lachin corridor, and the Lachin corridor is the only corridor that existed based on the November 9th statement with the term corridor. But at the same time, very often I hear this argument from the Azerbaijani side that, well, Russians are on the Armenian-Iranian border. How do you want us to agree on the nature of the road if the road passes a couple of meters from the Armenian-Iranian border? And obviously there is already a Russian presence on this road. But you know, this argument is quickly changing. If previously all of the Armenian-Iranian border was completely 100% under Russian control, that's not the situation anymore. First of all, the checkpoint between Armenia and Iran is back to the Armenian control. And also the border itself is now 50-50 under the control of the 50% of the border. It's intermixed, let's say. It's under the Russian control, but there is also 50% of the Armenian presence, or presence of the Armenian border service on the Armenian-Iranian border. By the end of the year, my understanding is that there will be no Russian presence on the Armenian-Iranian border, which will take out another argument why there should be a Russian presence on the negotiations. IKs, they are there on the ground, let's say. I think I'll stop here.
Well, I remember in February 2023, just 2 months before the establishment of the border checkpoint in Lachin, President Aliyev, when it was Munich, suggested that Armenia and Azerbaijan should bilaterally establish that border checkpoint, both at the entrance to the Lachin road and at the entrance to what is supposed to be Zangezur route. And Armenia rejected that proposal back then. And many Azerbaijani analysts are saying that had we established on bilateral basis the border checkpoints, Azerbaijan would not have had a problem with Armenia exercising border control at the entrance to the Zangezur route. But that opportunity has been missed. Arek mentioned about sovereignty. If I'm not mistaken, Azerbaijan has no problem in terms of recognizing that the passage as being Armenian territory. It's a question about the unimpeded nature of the access. And Arek said that the word unimpeded, unhindered is a very relative notion. Do you accept the proposition that Armenian sovereignty, although they do recognize, is still going to be somewhat curbed if we are following the policy of traveling from Azerbaijan, mainland Azerbaijan, to Nakhchivan exclave, which is also Azerbaijan, on the basis that Azerbaijan should not have any restriction on that route. Does it curb Armenian sovereignty? And what do you make of that point which Eric made about we don't know whether those cargo goods will have the final destination Turkey or Azerbaijan?
Orhan, you correctly mentioned that Azerbaijan recognized Armenia's sovereignty over territory where Zengezur corridor is supposed to pass. And Azerbaijan government never disputed Armenia's sovereignty over the region, despite the fact that it is a fact. Historically, it has been Azerbaijani territory. Hundreds of thousands of Azerbaijanis live there, and they have the right to return to this territory. But the return of people to the territories, Armenian territories, and living as citizens of Armenia and demanding this right is not a claim to the Armenia's territories. Azerbaijan government officially rejected that notion. But coming to your question, whether opening the Zengezur corridor and providing unimpeded passage is going to curb Armenia's sovereignty, it's an interesting fact, and we have to consider that according to the trilateral statement, it is not some other third parties that are going to be deployed to the southern Armenian territory and control the Zengezur corridor. It is Armenia's ally within the CSTO and within the Eurasian Economic Union, and Russia, Armenia's ally, has already its troops in Armenia. It has two military bases. It is, as Arek mentioned, it is deployed. Russia's border guards have been deployed to Armenia's borders with Iran as well as with Turkey. So deployment of some extra Russian troops to the Armenian territories is just an extra measure. It is not something new that would violate Armenia's sovereignty and its rights over the territory where Zengezur corridor is going to pass. That's one fact. Secondly, according to the trilateral statement, Armenia has taken this obligation, and Armenia, as you said, missed the opportunity to take advantage of the proposals of the Azerbaijani side prior to the collapse of separatist regime in Karabakh. Unfortunately for the Armenians, there is a tendency of the Armenian government to squander, to waste the opportunities that is offered at a particular time. For example, in the early 1990s, Azerbaijan was proposing Armenia to resolve the conflict and keeping some control of the local Armenian forces over, at the time, Nagorno-Karabakh. Azerbaijan was proposing highest level of autonomy to Karabakh, former Nagorno-Karabakh, but Armenians never accepted these proposals, which would have been now a very good opportunity, very advantageous for the Armenian side. And the same happened in talks on Zengezur corridor. As you correctly mentioned, Azerbaijani government at the highest level proposed to deploy checkpoints to both Laçın corridor and Zengezur corridor. And now Armenians is demanding that condition, which is already a missed opportunity. Azerbaijan restored its territorial integrity. The very criminal regime in former Nagorno-Karabakh destroyed, and now it is already a missed opportunity for Armenia to have some kind of checkpoint on so-called former Laçın corridor. And that's the reason why today the situation has changed for Armenia, and it has to understand the realities on the ground. That's first part. Secondly, coming to your question about potential of the opening of Zengezur corridor and its benefits for the Armenian. If I'm not mistaken, that was your question, right? If I'm mistaken, please remind me the question.
And also there was one element to us where I asked about Arik's proposition. Arik was saying that how can we be absolutely sure that those goods and cargo will eventually end up being in Nakhchivan,
Yes.
will not be transferred to Turkey? Because we're talking about traveling from Azerbaijan to Azerbaijan as a justification.
Exactly. I am sure that there are certain technical facilities which can be used to make sure that the cargo and passengers passing through the Zengezur corridor is going to Nakhchivan. And I think this sort of mechanisms can be decided by the sides bilaterally, also with the participation of some international organizations. In some stage of the negotiations, it was proposed to engage some international actors, international organizations, to facilitate the mechanisms. And I think it is technical details, and it can be definitely arranged by the sides if there is a political will to reach some agreement.
Yes, Arik, as Vasif said, I think that there's a considered opinion amongst many reputable Azerbaijani analysts, and also if you follow the official statement, there's no question of not recognizing Armenian sovereignty over that section of the southern Armenia, although delimitation and demarcation is still underway and the border issues will be reflected upon, but there never been any fundamental questioning of sovereignty as such. But I would like to reflect on a very interesting moment. I think the former Deputy Foreign Minister of Armenia, esteemed Dr. Libarizyan, mentioned about it as well on a number of occasions. There's a sort of a logical sort of principle in Azerbaijani-Armenian dynamics. When Azerbaijan offers something to Armenia, and Armenia is not sufficiently receptive in a timely fashion, the next demand from Azerbaijan becomes even more demanding. Effectively, what do you think? Will this principle, which seems to have guided Azerbaijani-Armenian dynamics, will remain in force, and how will it affect this opening of communication lines business? Because what we have noticed in Armenia, when the peace treaty suggestion was made by the government of Armenia that Azerbaijan and Armenia should sign a deal, some members of the opposition were saying that we need to revive the 2020 10 November Declaration. And we know that all of those people were against 10 November Declaration back in 2020, saying that it is act of treachery to sign that deal. Do you think this the question of Armenia not reacting in a timely fashion will bear upon the opening of communications business as well?
I will answer to the questions, obviously, but first I will make a comment that I usually don't participate in any conversation which is more of a propaganda nature rather than a fact-based. And referring to any part of Armenia as in the scopes historical Azerbaijan, and talking about hundreds of thousands of Azerbaijanis who ever lived in any part of Armenia without, for example, talking about even more Armenians who live to Azerbaijan is a classical propaganda unworthy of the academical conversation. That's a comment, and if it is continued, I will just stop my participation in the conversation. Now, regarding to the nature of the conversation, let's say between Armenia and Azerbaijan, yes, I think that esteemed Libarizyan's thoughts about the Nagorno-Karabakh negotiations and the inability of Armenia to understand the timely manner of the negotiations is 100% correct. However, there is a red line which unfortunately many participants of the conversation fail to understand, and that red line is Armenia itself. None of these conversations, none of the opportunities, or none of the more hard demands can refer to the proper territory of Armenia. You, in your speech, for example, talked about the missed opportunity to basically establish a custom control on the Armenian border. I don't share that opinion. I don't think it's a missed opportunity. It was, to an extent, all of the opportunities we're referring to can be referred to the Nagorno-Karabakh. But on the border, on the Armenian territory, there can be no missed opportunities. There can be only the conditions of the Armenian side. If someone doesn't like the Armenian conditions, he can just keep traveling through the territory of Armenia. He can travel through the territory of Iran. If that means continuation of the current logistics and of the current shut borders, so be it. Armenia survived it in 30 years. It can continue surviving it for another 30 years until a better condition. But hoping that the same nature or the same manner of the negotiations that existed about the Nagorno-Karabakh normalization can continue about the proper Armenian territory and the territory of the Republic of Armenia is an absolute nonsense. Armenia will never go on for that.
Okay. Well, Arik, we are here having a free debate, and you're perfectly entitled to express your opinions. And we value your opinions, by the way, and we thank you for your participation. As long as the other side, they're also entitled to express their opinions. I think that should be the way we should go. I mean, Vasif, there are others in Armenia, and not just in Armenia. And recently, when the German president was here in Azerbaijan, I had a chance to converse with some German journalists. They were telling me that Azerbaijan is too demanding vis-à-vis Armenia, and that if Yerevan even removed that constitutional obstacle with the OSCE Minsk group dissolved, Baku would find a new requirement in order not to sign a peace deal, because it doesn't need to sign this peace deal. What do you make of this argument, which is very popular these days?
Some people, both in Armenia and I have seen those people also in some European countries, believe that Azerbaijan has put these conditions at just latest stage of negotiations in order to prevent the signing of the peace treaty. It contradicts the realities in the negotiations. Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev first talked about the territorial claims in the Armenian constitution in September 2021. At that time, even peace treaty was not proposed to sign. Azerbaijan proposed peace treaty in March 2022. And almost 6 months before that, in September 2021, in an interview with Turkish media channels, President Aliyev said that there are territorial claims in the state constitution of Armenia, both against Azerbaijan and against Turkey, and these claims should be removed from the constitution for the peace and security in the South Caucasus. So it is not a new condition put by the Azerbaijani side. It is out there since very beginning of the post-Second Karabakh War peace talks. And considering the second condition proposed by the Azerbaijani side, it is OSCE Minsk Group, and OSCE Minsk Group used to be criticized, even condemned by the Azerbaijani people, even before the Second Karabakh War. And Azerbaijan understands that the existing of the Minsk Group as an institution out there is a relic of the conflict. And if we are willing to open a new chapter in the Armenia-Azerbaijan relations, we have to get rid of all the relics of the conflict. And the Minsk Group is one of them. Minsk Group never made any positive contribution to the peace talks between Armenia and Azerbaijan. One of the reasons why all these peace talks prior to the Second Karabakh War failed was the very fact of Minsk Group, because some of the co-chairs were pursuing their own interests rather than the interest of Armenia and Azerbaijan. And they were somehow managing the conflict rather than trying to resolve it. So the Minsk Group has very negative reputation in Azerbaijan, and we want now to get rid of it. And Armenian side should also try to get rid of it if they are also willing to close the chapter of conflict and open the path for peace and reconciliation between the peoples of Armenia and Azerbaijan. So coming to the third part of your question, whether the Azerbaijan is going to put new conditions if Armenia changes constitution and agrees to dismantle the Minsk Group before the signing of peace treaty. As a citizen of Azerbaijan and as an expert on political affairs and following the Armenia-Azerbaijan peace process very closely, I personally think that I can assure that there will be no new conditions if the two conditions from the state constitution of Republic of Armenia and the Minsk Group are met. Because Azerbaijan wants peace in the region perhaps much more than Armenia. This conflict has cost us more than 100 billion manats and thousands of people, even more importantly, thousands of people. We have lost a lot of people in Azerbaijan, including myself as a direct victim of the First Karabakh War. A lot of people lost their childhood. A lot of people lost their family members, happiness, etc. The people of Azerbaijan just want to get rid of this conflict. And this motivation should exist also on the Armenian side. Unfortunately, we observe that some Armenian political experts, some Armenian opposition figures still dream of revanchism, retaking the lost territories. It is a fact out there, Arek. It is not some kind of propaganda based on ungrounded accusations. It exists in Armenian media channels. You can check it. Armenian political experts, some of them opposition figures, call for further military supplies from Russia, from France, from India, from many countries, and to get prepared for a new war to retake the territories. So in order to prevent it, one of the conditions is that these territorial claims in the foundational documents of Armenia, it is not only in the state constitution, there are some parliamentary resolutions, parliamentary acts adopted in the early 1990s, which abolished the signing of any international document which would recognize Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan. So we are afraid that in the future, some people, some revanchist, political-minded people in Armenia will refer to these facts and restart the conflict.
Thank you, Vasif. Our time is limited, but of course, I would like to give last word to Arek. Arek, thank you very much for your patience. Arek, you last time when we had a conversation, and thank you very much, Vasif, for your answer, you said that constitution is not a problem. You made that point very clear. And you, as I understand, you said that constitution, this obstacle could be removed. Although you said that it has already been removed, but Azerbaijan does not agree with this argument. You said that Armenia has already solved Azerbaijan's constitutional problem. I exactly remember what you said. You referred to the court ruling of which was issued in late August or early September. I think it was in late August. You also referred to some other elements. Azerbaijan has a different view about this subject. But do you believe that if those two prerequisites, namely Armenian constitution and OSCE Minsk Group dissolution, are sorted out, these two countries will eventually sign this deal or not? Or do you think something extra will emerge? Because there's one key sensibility, and I've noticed it in this Azerbaijani-Armenian dynamics. If Armenia reacts not in a timely fashion, that after some stage, it is quite possible that geopolitical circumstances will change and something new will emerge. We cannot genuinely exclude that possibility. What is your reading of the situation? Please, floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. First of all, about this more hawkish part, let's say, of the population or of the expert community. I mean, in both countries, I genuinely believe a more hawkish part of the community exists, both in Azerbaijan and Armenia. And I'm very often reading, let's say, some Azerbaijani Telegram channels where there are a lot of experts and a lot of people who are calling to seize and occupy Sionic region or the Meghri part of Armenia and establish the Zangezur corridor, or just to return to, as in Azerbaijan, they call it Yerevan. So all of this is pretty hawkish to me, and noticing some political experts or some politicians in Armenia, but not noticing your own sort of people of the same nature is again very one-sided. On contradiction to that, we have a government that is ready to do a lot and beyond a lot to sign the peace treaty, and the latest proof to this is the Armenian side unilaterally agreeing to the last two demands of Azerbaijan to sign the peace agreement. Those were referring to the presence of the third parties on the border, namely to the European Union mission in Armenia, and to the calling back the international court cases against each other. Those two were the last demands of Azerbaijan. This was something Azerbaijan wanted, and this was something that was preventing us from signing the peace treaty, and the Armenian side unilaterally agreed to this. Now, when after that we hear these demands from Azerbaijan regarding to the OSCE Minsk Group and constitution, this is bad news indeed, because yes, on public, these demands were aired for several times, but they were not part of the negotiation on the peace treaty. This is what is very important, because we hear a lot of announcements in Azerbaijan. For example, we have heard an announcement from your president that Armenia should return the weaponry it already bought from different countries. Now, is this a demand or it is not a demand? In the same fashion, we heard demands about the constitution, we have heard demands about the Minsk Group, OSCE, etc., etc. Nothing that is announced but is actually negotiated is part of the negotiation process. Sides can announce in their homeland whatever they want. As long as it is not the part of the negotiation, it is not a demand, let's say, on the table. And the proof that it was never a part of the negotiation on the peace treaty is the fact that the peace treaty text was agreed without any references to the constitution and without any references to the OSCE Minsk Group. This is the biggest proof that Armenia agreed to the text suggested by Azerbaijan. And in the text suggested by Azerbaijan, there was no reference to the Minsk Group, OSCE, or to the constitution. This is the biggest proof that these are new demands, not the old, let's say, part of the conversation. But going to the nature of those demands, let's say, I'm even surprised that we're still talking about two demands, because one of them is basically solved. Armenian side announced that the day we will agree on the time and the place of signing the peace treaty will also be the day when we can jointly, Armenia and Azerbaijan can jointly start the procedure of dissolving the Minsk Group. So it's not a problem for the Armenian side. It's not that the Armenian side has anything against to the dissolving of the Minsk Group or OSCE Minsk Group. As soon as we sign the peace treaty or even have an agreement when and where do we sign the peace treaty, we can immediately start the procedures of the procedures of dissolving the peace treaty. And now with regards to the constitution, first of all, the nature of the problem that Azerbaijan refers to also exists in the Azerbaijani constitution itself. It refers to the First Azerbaijani Republic, and First Azerbaijani Republic was declared on territories that are far beyond the current territory declared, far beyond the current territory of Azerbaijan. So if we're talking about problems in the constitution, the same kind of a problem exists also in the Azerbaijani constitution. But on the Armenian side, when the demarcation process started and the charter was signed and was sent to the Constitutional Court, something very, very important happened. Armenian Constitutional Court basically announced, and this is something final, this is something that can't be changed according to the Armenian legislature, that the parts of the Declaration of Independence in Armenia and all of the problems Azerbaijan have are about the Declaration of Independence, not about the Constitution's body itself. That are not repeated in the Constitution text are not de jure part of the Constitution, meaning that the Declaration of Independence of Armenia is a historical document. It's not a bodical part. It doesn't have a legislative power equal to the Constitution. So all of the problems that Azerbaijan thinks that exist in the Armenian Constitution, they don't exist. And which brings us to my last comment on the issue. I still don't think that constitution is the problem. The problem is that in Azerbaijani political leadership, there is a calculus that right now the peace doesn't bring equal benefits to Armenia and Azerbaijan. That peace brings more benefits to Armenia rather than to Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan wants additional calories, let's say, for the peace. Those calories can come from Armenia, those calories can come from the European Union or from the Americans. Azerbaijan is just interested in equal benefits from the peace and is not ready to sign the peace treaty as long as the benefits are not divided equally. Even if now Armenia would somehow solve the constitution issue that would be, let's say, satisfying for Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan will definitely find new reasons not to sign the peace treaty because the constitution is not the problem. The problem, as I said, is the calculus that the peace doesn't bring equal benefits.
Well, regarding the Armenian constitution, the view in Azerbaijan as Vasil said, is quite different, dramatically different, of course. And there are some other acts. 1992, I think, act adopted in January, reservations related to Almaty declaration. 1992 act, I think, on the 8th of June or 8th of July, about that Armenia would never agree to any international document recognizing Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan. And the view here is that actually that 1990 declaration was developed properly throughout decades. It only as a result of losing the war in 2020 and as a result of the operation in September, Armenia was sort of forced to accept that Karabakh is Azerbaijan. Otherwise, Armenia would not have done that. And also regarding Azerbaijani constitution, I think the analysts here probably would say that there's a constitutional act of Azerbaijan, wherein Azerbaijan is recognized as a successor to Azerbaijan Democratic Republic, but it does not make any claim in relation to any section of the territory of modern Armenia. So it's not a territorial claim, and actually in Azerbaijan there's no official legislation wherein the term Western Azerbaijan used. So it's a community, it's about right of return. I'm just telling you what people in Azerbaijan would say to those comments that you made. I don't know, Vasil, if you could very briefly, I said that the last word is...
I'm sorry, two very small, very short comments. Very short comments. From the moment you are calling it Western Azerbaijan, it stops to be about the community.
Yeah.
Terms matter. The term Western Azerbaijan cannot be about the community. It's a know-how, newly made geographical term that has territorial demands against Azerbaijan.
Well, the same applies probably to Western Armenia.
And second, about the Declaration of Independence. Throughout the history, the 30 years of Armenia, there were more than 1 million court cases in Armenia that one way or another were referring to the constitution. In not a single one of them, except for one, there was a reference to the Declaration of Independence. In dozens of legislation in Armenia, in not a single one of them, there was a reference to the Declaration of Independence. More than that, in the law about the territorial administration of Armenia, it refers to the current territory of Armenia. And the very last one, in the peace treaty, there is an article, peace agreement. There is an article which says that the sides cannot refer to their inner legislation or to their inner political processes in a fashion not to oblige to this peace agreement. Yeah. Meaning that everything you're talking about, be that the announcement of the Central Committee of the Soviet Armenia, be that any decision of the parliament, none of them can be used not to fulfill the peace agreement, because the article, I'm not sure which is the number of the article, but there is a very specific article in the peace treaty which says that sides cannot refer to their inner legislation or political processes to contradict this agreement.
I haven't seen the draft text of the peace agreement on peace and the interstate relations, but I'm sort of given to understand on the basis of my analysis that there is a provision which says that no state, no party could resort to its internal legislation in order to obviate its international legal obligations emanating from the text of the treaty. Vasil, it would be fair, just very briefly, if you want to say something, by all means. I mean, just very briefly say so.
Orhan,
I don't want this, to turn into a, perpetual exchange.
We have suffered a lot from the conflict, and on the Azerbaijan side, there is a determination to root out all the potential legal or political uncertainties which can be used someone in the future in Armenia, some political leader or political party, to restart these claims, territorial claims, and to restart a war, revanchist war against Azerbaijan. It is a fact that should be respected, because this conflict started from some very dubious claims with no legal or some legal underpinnings. And it may seem, unconvincing to the Armenian side. They both think that it is just a maneuver to avoid signing the peace treaty. Azerbaijan is not interested in peace. They can interpret it that way. But for Azerbaijani people who have suffered a lot from this occupation, it is not just artificial demand. It is something real. We have to root out all the legal or political uncertainties that can be used someone in Armenia or can be exploited by some external actors to restart the conflict. The Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict was never just a matter of Armenia-Azerbaijan relations. This conflict was manipulated by external actors as well. So we try to remove, to eliminate all these points that can be used in the future to start the conflict.
Well, great thanks to both of you, Arek Kochinyan and Vasif Hussein. I'm so grateful for showing tactical patience, listening to each other very carefully, for not losing your plot. I'm so grateful to both of you, gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
This were Arek Kochinyan, President of the Research Center on Security Policy, Yerevan, Armenia, and Vasif Huseinov, Head of the Department at the Center for Analysis of International Relations. Well, the geopolitics of the South Caucasus has perceptibly changed as of November 2020. As a result of this, the kaleidoscope of regional connectivity was shaken too, with some pieces of potential future transportation linkages currently remaining in flux, and they will be settled at some point. Before they are settled, all regional actors, including Azerbaijan and Armenia, want to reorder them around their own interests. There is a competition between Azerbaijan and Armenia regarding this. However, cooperation is a necessity. You are watching Caucasus Now, and see you very soon indeed.